Today's subject is the buttons, also known as keys, on the Superba white Fildar Singer family of machines. Jack will be referring to them as buttons. These are where they're located, and most English translations of the manual actually refer to them as keys. But whatever you call them, they're what selects certain stitch features. They can be used in somewhat elaborate combinations, but in general, this is circular, tuck, normal knitting, and cancel. This movie begins with the cover already off of the carriage, otherwise known as a sled in some of the manuals. If you don't know how to get the cover off, you'll need either the top movie if you're working on a more modern Superba, or the bottom movie if you are working on the cute little vintage suitcase Superbas. I will try to put links to those movies in the program notes so that you can find them if you need the help.
People are asking about the buttons and how the buttons operate, what the buttons are supposed to do. And I believe one friend thinks they might have a spring broken or misplaced. But I'll start on the right. There's a button corresponding to the circular knitting symbol.
That's right. That causes one bed to knit going one direction, and usually you use it with the other going the opposite.
And notice the far left button won't stay locked in because it's the 0 saying no other buttons. If there's a button, that will cancel it. Center button moves this slide. We'll cancel it and do it one more time. But you got one with a no point to its arrow and one with a point to the arrow. So that's that one, and you'll notice it moves these two things at the same time. So there's springs to be looking for. Now notice that your cancel button moves one side only. Okay, that's the arrow button there. It moves both this piece and this piece at the same time, and you'll notice they don't move the same distance. This one comes out a little farther than that one. Okay, we've gone through the fact that the buttons, cancellation button, arrow with a point, arrow with no point, and circular knitting buttons, and we've seen what it is they do. I will tell you right now, we had a couple of these stick on us, so we're going to go to the underside, which means when we do that, these guys fall right off. And you notice they'll spin around any kind of a way. You take them off so they're pointing to the 0. And if you look, and you got to keep left and right in orientation, so the easiest thing to do is when you lift the cover up, lift these buttons up, put the left one on the left and the right one on the right. If you look under the cover, you'll see the lowest possible or the highest possible spot for those is right in this area and this area. And that's exactly what they do. The 0 means that they're not engaging anything. These will also fall out once you have the cover off, and you have to put them back on, pointing to what they were pointing at when you took the cover off. So this is all not what we're talking about. What we want to see is what these buttons do underneath, and since they stuck, I'm going to drip just a little bit of Ballast Doll. I know I always say that the silicone LPS products are the best, but Catherine has found that for this particular machine, the Ballast Doll works better. It is a metal on metal machine, and I think that is why a lot of the interior workings on many of these are some type of a polymer. This is not. Now, cancellation button, and I will show you by holding this up. Watch the slide right here. The cancellation button moves the slide. And when it's in its moved position, again getting my big fat hand out of the way, notice you can see the tangs on the other 3 buttons. They go down, and I'll let you see this one, it's easiest to see, and they lock under a lip that I will show you right there. See that angular lip? When that tang comes down and this plate is all the way to the left, it'll slide along this curve and lock right in there. And that's why the cancellation button moves this slide. And it doesn't hurt to put a drop or two. In fact, I'm going to turn the carriage up for a second, of oil on that slide as you operate it, because it needs to be smooth.
Yeah.
All right, what we did was we poured a little Ballast Doll on this side and let it run this way. I poured a little bit on this side and let it run the other way. And I finally had to go up here and put some Ballast Doll where this slide operates. I'll show you. Right in here.
Can you show us with your other hand, please?
Yes. Tell you what. Aha! Where this slide operates underneath here, I'll cancel. But where that slide operates, and I had to pour some on each side, I had to go on the bottom and put some around both of these flippers. And notice this disc here. I'll do it again. See, that disc is a follower that operates this. So it was not correctly doing it. So now we have this one working both sides here. This one working, and you notice it works right in here. I'll do it again. Watch this plate. And it raises up, changes the needle path. And then the last one is one-sided. The circular knitting is one-sided. It's got a path this way that's blocked when that's down. So that's your button operation. Let me point out that when these buttons are pivoting here on the shaft, they have to do it smoothly. You may have to pour some oil in and leave it. There's also a spring underneath here around that shaft on both sides that'll help this lever come back into its resting position. On the top side, notice 1, 2, 3 springs. I'll lift it up. 1, 2, 3 big coil springs. All right, when it's canceled now, these two are being pulled. This one's being pulled. And now this one's being pulled by itself. These springs are sold by the diameter of the spring coil, the length of the spring at rest, and then does it have a circle on each end, which this one does, to attach it to a tang on the machine. They can be purchased from a spring company. Go online, look for coiled retraction springs. See, these also have springs behind the buttons. So part of your movement is this spring. Part of the movement is the spring behind the button. These are also sold by diameter and length of relaxed spring, but these are compression springs. They're forced into one position and they're relaxed in another. So when you've got these two guys working these two levers, you also have the spring behind this button. This one kept sticking. I would press the spring in and it did not want to push the button back out, so these guys could not return because this button spring wasn't working properly. So we put a little Ballast Doll underneath there. And each one of these buttons have a slide that sticks out that the button's mounted on, so that when you get them off, just like other machines, you force the button off of its slide and the spring pops out with the button. I have seen these springs bent or broken behind the button, and they can be replaced. And these big coil springs, but if you look in here, which the camera can't do unfortunately, but if you put your eyes inside of this, you will see there are small coil springs inside on the post. They are just helper springs if they're there. You can do without them, But we've had people say that my springs aren't working right, that my flip buttons aren't doing anything. And if that's true, it could be that they need lubrication. Almost always, they need lubrication. And remember those two that I was just pointing at, this is the top part of the button. You can watch it move along here, but it doesn't have much force to follow that lever. And there it's not doing it.
Well,
there it goes, there it goes. It is gravity centric so that
it works better in the position it was
Yes.
intended to work.
Exactly. And me slanting it, but you can see there's a follower. There's another one underneath there, and I'll bring it out. There's the follower. These are responsible for the flipper action here. And that little follower is under this screw right here and right here. But you see they're independent, and that's why they're gravity centric, because they will move on their own, and that's something to look for. Are they in a position and stuck? That's where that little spring that I told you about around the post comes in, is to pop this into place when it's released by that follower. See, notice that the follower comes back when this spring retracts it. But that little tiny spring under here is what makes this come. You can see when I move it, there's a little spring action to it, but that's a tiny spring. If that spring's broken, you'll have to take that flipper off, and you can actually order that coil spring also. You have to tell them what size it is and what length the two arms are, and that's what determines the spring. Now, notice that here's a spot where we had to pull two screws out. Right here is the one I'll show you. The screw goes right in that hole there. But these little springs that are up now have to be lined up so that it gets on two posts, too much oil. One post here and one post on the end, and both of these need to be where they'll go over their posts when you put the screws back in. But that's how your buttons are supposed to work. If they're not working, I would say first thing, lubricate them. Put a lot of oil on it. If you'll notice, I've got a pig mat, and look at how much oil came through onto the pig mat through my cloth, because I am very liberal with it.
We tried being daintier with it. Didn't work.
No, it just requires soaking. And then get you one of your scrubs in a tub and clean your buttons and clean your dial, clean your row tripper, and then just leave that oil in there. Because the reason these buttons were sticking is this machine has set up through some really hot, really damp, really cool weather. And that's murder on oil. That's one of the reasons I recommend the silicon-based products for a lot of machines. But Catherine swears this one must have this 10-weight oil. So use it liberally, put it on a pig mat, let it drain, put it back together, and go to knitting with some scrap yarn to take the oil out.
Yes, and by the way, it does wash out. Regular old detergent, soak it for a little bit. If you get it on something important or yourself, it looks like the end of the world, but it's not.
And I will point out that when I release these, they actually spit little drops of oil out. That's good. If they don't, they probably don't have enough oil.
You're not going to need to do this very often, this extreme lubing down in there. I have been running this one ever since we did the series on restoring it with very little oil. It got back to good, and it's been fine. And this is the first time it's really needed a good dosing.
And before we go, let me show you this spring right here, which is part of the return. But this is what I'm talking about under the post of that flipper. One end of the spring is anchored here. The other end of the spring is anchored here. And that's how it's keeping its tension. That's the same type of spring, but much smaller, that is on the base post of each one of these flippers. So that's what you're looking for when you look down in there, to make sure that one end of it that I can see right through here is there, and right through there is there. And you may need to shine a good flashlight down in to make sure that both ends of the spring are in position, and that when it's released, there is some spring tension on it.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, let me put this back on.
Yeah.